of the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. Before we get too far into the presentation, I did want to mention a couple of housekeeping items. First, this meeting is being recorded, and we'll make a link to the recording available via the INDOT website for anyone that needs to go back and reference something they may have missed, or for folks that weren't able to join us today to go back and watch the webinar later on. Also, want to mention that if you've joined us, you have been placed on a mute. That's just so that we don't have background noise or feedback across our speakers. But when we get to the time for questions, certainly feel free to jump in. And at that point, if you do have a question, please be sure to unmute yourself. But then if you're finished speaking, or if you're not speaking, again, please be courteous and place yourself on mute so that we don't have crosstalk on the webinar. And then finally, we will have a period for question and answer at the end, but certainly feel free to jump in if you have questions throughout the course of the presentation. If you do have something that you want to ask midstream, please feel free to use the raise hand button, which I believe is up in the top of your of the Teams dashboard there. Raise your hand. That will alert our speakers to let us know that you have a question, and we'll pause and take an opportunity to answer those midstream. But again, we will have an opportunity for questions at the end as well. So again, we're excited to provide an update on where we are. We've made a lot of progress here in the last few months, and happy to have an opportunity to talk specifically with those of you in the utility community that'll be such an important partner in helping us to deliver this program. To introduce our speakers, first of all, my name is Scott Manning. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff for the Indiana Department of Transportation, and have been involved in helping to deliver the NEVI program since the program was announced at the federal level with the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law back in November of 2021. And I'll hand it off to Diane Newton with HNTB to give an introduction.
Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Newton. I'm with HNTB in our Indiana office. And as Scott mentioned, we had helped Indiana write their EV implementation plan and are now under contract as their program management consultant. So we're really excited to be working alongside INDOT for the next 5 years to implement this program. And I will also introduce Kaylee from Greater Indiana Clean Cities. They were our partner on the plan development. And Kaylee, I'll let you kind of give some background on Greater Indiana.
Yeah, so Greater Indiana was working with INDOT on some of the engagement and outreach for the plan development, and now we're looking at working on the vendor registry and engaging with those interested in taking part in the process and finding out more about how they can partner and take advantage of some of this funding that's available. Very great to be here with you all today.
Thank you, Kaylee. Just a quick rundown of what we hope to cover today. We'll provide a brief overview of the NEVI program itself and some of the key requirements. For those of you that have been following along as this program has unfolded, this may be review for you. So we'll just briefly talk through that. Also give you a sense of the location of our candidate sites, and also run through our implementation timeline, and sort of give you a broad flavor of what we will be looking for partnership with utility providers as we implement this. And as I mentioned, have time for question and answers at the end. So in terms of the NEVI program overview, as I said, won't belabor this too much, as I know many folks that are on the call have had an opportunity to review this information. But NEVI obviously is part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, or the IJA, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. The goal outlined by President Biden was to create a network of 500,000 EV chargers across the country within the next decade. To accomplish that goal, there are two large buckets of funding available through the bill that are specifically targeted to EV charging and other alternative fuel infrastructure. One of those is the $5 billion formula funding bucket, which is what we're going to be largely talking about today. That $5 billion is for the NEVI program. And then there are also $2.5 billion of discretionary grant funding available for the community charging and fueling infrastructure program. So EV charging is eligible under that program, but other alternative fuel infrastructure is eligible as well. We will not touch too much on the discretionary grant program today. Again, we'll be largely focused on NEVI, but just a quick plug there. You may have seen earlier this week, if you've been tracking the discretionary grant program, the charging and fueling infrastructure program, the deadline to apply for that program has been extended to June 13th. So just wanted to share that for anyone that may not be aware. As far as the key requirements, as I mentioned, the goal is to build out a national network along the country's highway system. So the focus of NEVI will be on alternative fuel corridors. In most states, those are largely interstates and major highways. One of the requirements is for stations that are NEVI funded to be placed no more than 50 miles apart and within 1 mile of an interchange or intersection. Again, that really speaks to the range anxiety goal, or I should say goal to reduce range anxiety for EV owners and potential future EV owners. From a power capability standpoint, each of the charging stations funded by NEVI must have a minimum of 4 ports and be able to deliver at least 150 kilowatts simultaneously. And states are largely looking to contract the delivery of the NEVI program out. So looking very much to partner with the private sector to own and operate these stations. That's the case here in Indiana, and we'll get into a little bit more detail on that as we go. So for this audience, obviously there's great familiarity with the types of EV charging infrastructure that is out there commercially available today. So I won't spend a lot of time on this slide, other than to mention that, again, the NEVI program is specifically focused, and the requirements are built around DC fast charging. So that will be the area of focus for this program. And from a compatibility standpoint, the ports that will be eligible for funding through NEVI are the CCS1 connectors. So you see that on the left side there of the fast charge graphic. There are opportunities to add additional connectors, such as the Tesla connector, to provide availability for those vehicles, but that would be sort of as ancillary or complementary, not necessarily covered under NEVI. So DC fast charging and the CCS1 connectors this is the type of infrastructure that'll be funded through the NEVI program as we get into the rollout phases. I mentioned that the focus of the funding from a geographic standpoint, deployment standpoint, will be along interstates and major highway corridors. Those are the routes that within Indiana, and this is true of most of our other states, these are the routes that have been nominated and approved by the Federal Highway Administration as alternative fuel corridors. So you see a map on this slide that highlights those alternative fuel corridors across the state of Indiana. I think in Indiana, we're fortunate in that we're able to take advantage of the robust highway network that we have to be able to bring this type of charging infrastructure to support not only regional and national travel, long distance travel through Indiana, but because we have alternative fuel corridors that really touch every region of our state, we will be able to really be strategic in placing this infrastructure to meet the needs that we have from regional travel, but also meet the needs for Hoosiers traveling within the state, and specifically to bring fast charging to areas of the state that don't have it available or don't have a ton of availability of it today. I did want to preview a little bit. We are anticipating a 7th round of nominations for alternative fuel corridors happening sometime later this year. And we do anticipate adding US 30 across the northern third of our state to this list, and potentially looking at some other key highway corridors as well, where we see opportunity to serve existing and future EV customers. So we'll keep close tabs on that and continue to take advantage of those opportunities to nominate AFC corridors as they become available. So on the implementation approach, a couple of these things I've already touched on, but just to reiterate, with the NEVI program, there is an opportunity for the states to really leverage the private sector for the design, construction, operation, and maintenance of these charging stations. So we'll be looking for private owner operators or private owner operators in tandem with local governments or nonprofit partners or different combinations of partners to serve as the owner operators, but the state itself will not be owning and operating the infrastructure, but rather will be in an administrative role, ensuring that the program at large and the individual locations are operating within and meeting the requirements of the federal programs. Another, I think, important item to mention is sort of the funding breakdown for NEVI. This program is federally funded, as I touched on earlier. So from a procurement standpoint, each of the locations that we make available for proposals, there will be an opportunity to tap into 80% federal funding for that design, construction, installation, operation, and maintenance over 5 years. But to access that federal funding, there will be a need for the proposer to provide at least 20% match. When I say at least, we do anticipate having scoring criteria that would award additional points for proposals that look to fund above and beyond that 20%. But that 20% will be the minimum to be able to tap into the federal funding. Just a couple of other points to highlight. Again, the priority from a scoring standpoint will recognize those sites that are the most ready for construction. And so I think one important factor to call out there would be one, utility coordination, and two, having site agreements in place with a host. Those are, from what we're hearing, collaboration across the ecosystem. We're hearing that those are really two of the most intensive and critical path items are having that site agreement executed and ready to go, and also the due diligence on the front end with utility partners. So we'll go ahead to the next slide. Some of this previewed a little bit here. Our evaluation criteria. Again, I mentioned the site readiness is a factor that will be a focus of the scoring and an opportunity to have proposals sort of stand out among the rest, if you will, in addition to future proofing and some of the other factors that you see here. So at this point, I'll hand it off to Diane, who is going to walk through our candidate site locations.
All right, thanks, Scott. So this is the current draft of our site map. After we did the EV implementation plan that was approved in September, we continued to coordinate with our stakeholders, including some of you guys that are on the phone today. So in the plan, we had 44 sites that were required. These were identified by interchange, and we had 44 sites across the alternative fuel corridors that would solve for the 50-mile gap question that is required by NEVI. But we also identified 28 alternative sites in the event that there were challenges finding a site host. So that was about 72. Since plan was approved in September, we've bumped up that number of alternative sites based on kind of what we've heard through our continued engagement. So our current map has about 80 sites on the map. They're color coded on this map by corridor, and you see the breakout there on the left. According to corridor, how many locations that there are. So obviously on 465, there's probably not five locations necessary to meet the 50-mile requirement, but we have alternates in there. And obviously then you factor in the proximity to the adjacent corridors when you're looking at something like 465. But we do want to have a lot of options, and we're working right now to prioritize these 80 sites according to their annual traffic, the population of the surrounding area, and some of the feedback that we hope to get now that the maps are online. So that's kind of one of our newest things. I know I've shown some of the utilities on the call, but the deployment map, the interactive version, has been published to INDOT's website as of yesterday. So when you go to INDOT's NEVI program page and click on deployment plan and maps, there's a link there for the interactive map, and it will bring up an ArcGIS map, kind of what you see. I took a screen capture here for this slide. And this enables anyone to go and view each location. When you click on the pin, it will pull up that interchange, and you'll see the 1 mile driving distance polygon. And you can kind of see it on this graph. The purple shaded areas are the transportation disadvantaged communities. And there's also the ability to toggle on and off some other data set layers, so you could see these locations relative to some other pieces of information. But the big thing really that the interactive map allows us to do is to collect that feedback and interest by location. So this is what will pop up when you click on one of those pins. Actually, when you click on one of the pins and hit feedback, then a little survey form pops up. And this will ask for some information. It will ask you to identify what type of stakeholder you are. There also is some optional information around company name and telephone number. But what we're hoping to get is people's understanding or their indication of favorability. How favorable would that interchange be as a location? And is there interest in being a part of the deployment at that interchange? And there's also a general comment form for anything else that people may be wanting to share about that particular interchange. And then at the very bottom, there's that box that says check to share information. So that will allow users to opt into the vendor registry that Carrie mentioned. Carrie and the team at Greater Indiana Clean Cities will be leading that oversight of the vendor registry, and that will help us assist anyone interested in deployment to connect. So whether it's an EVSE vendor, a site host, you guys as utilities, they can connect, and we'll be able to download a form. We'll be able to export this as a CSV. We can sort it by interchange, by corridor, so we can do a couple of different views and consolidation of the data to help understand where there may be some introductions needed or coordination needed. So we're really excited about having this more interactive feature for our maps. I think Scott touched on our implementation, and that certainly was one of the biggest questions we got during the plan development process. We fine-tuned this a little bit based on what was in the plan. The formula funding comes to INDOT incrementally. They've received their first 2 years of formula funds, and so that will be what we use to start that competitive procurement process. The goal really is to procure as many sites as possible. Ideally, the minimum number of 44 could be awarded through that single procurement, especially if a milestone payment approach is followed. So the procurement process we're working on right now, we're working through the planning around the methodology. We've started to write the draft RFP, saw a piece of that with the evaluation criteria. And that process will actively start in June when the draft RFP is posted. And then hopefully there'll be awards made by the end of 2023, not necessarily contracted, but contingent awards by the end of 23 with awards in 24. And then with the expected equipment ordering timeframes, we're not being overly aggressive with implementation timeframes. So it says 24 to 25. We know with 18 to 24-month lead times for some of the EVSE components and transformers, probably looking at, 2025 for implementation. And we will make that decision on the need for a second procurement once we get through the award process on the first one. So whether we see if all of the gaps have been filled, if any of the sites fall out during the contracting process or the final award process, we have that ability to do a second procurement. And that would probably take place around that same time of early 2025. And then hopefully there's that full build out of AFCs and you're standing up of the reporting framework and everything that's necessary from the federal NEVI program. So I wanted to drill down a little bit. This slide breaks down that procurement and contracting box from the previous slide. So right now we're working on the RFP. We're building out all the specific requirements that bidders will have to respond to, defining eligible costs and the format of the response. But you kind of see in this the importance and the role of the utilities early on. We know that one important element that bidders will need to provide is their understanding of the utility readiness and their documentation that they have coordinated with the utility provider. And so we wanted to just convey that to you guys. We're doing our due diligence right now, working with you to find out that best way to engage and what the time frame for response would be, and basically what information we can facilitate gathering ahead of the procurement being released. The other thing to point out is that I mentioned this two-step award process. So when you look at the center box around contracting, the contingent award would provide the winners, the site winners, funding to do some pre-construction activities, including site design and utility coordination. But the final award would be contingent on the environmental permitting, any local or municipality permits, and the utility coordination. So we're sort of keeping that, applying that milestone approach and continuing that on through the award process. So again, that utility coordination becomes important again as we look at the final award process. So the near-term schedule, this slide summarizes our major upcoming activities. I think some of you have seen and are invited and maybe presenting at INDOT's EV Open House, which is next week on the 23rd. If you haven't seen it, I put a link to the RSVP and we can send the slides out after the meeting so you have that link. The RSVPs are due by May 19th. The format's really interactive. We're going to have speakers and presentations from state and federal representatives, but also more interactive panels, including one on utility coordination and EVSE installation project lessons learned. So it's going to be a day where it's designed for people to sort of pop in and out and attend the sessions that are interesting to them. And also, again, sort of help facilitate introductions among the different players in this space. The draft RFP is in development right now, and that will be posted for public comment on June 1st. We'll leave it up for about 2 weeks, but we'll very soon after that have a pre-proposal webinar. So that is yet another opportunity for us to get some feedback. We'll walk through the RFP on that webinar and obviously have a pretty decent Q&A portion. So we get all the questions asked and answered and incorporated before the RFP is released. We're tentatively slating, we had July 1st, it seemed a little tight, and with the 4th of July holiday thrown in there, we have that now for the week after the 4th of July on the 7th. And we wanted to leave it out. We expect that the response timeframe will be at least 6 weeks, most likely, to enable that coordination that has to take place for the deployment teams, because the goal really is to procure a turnkey solution for each site. So we know that may take some time for the teams to come together. So we anticipate the RFP being out for 6 weeks, and then a similar time frame on the review process. So that would mean a selection is announced before the end of the year for the sites and a contract in early 2024. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kaylee. Kaylee's going to cover a couple things. She's going to talk about our engagement with the utility providers during the plan development, and then what's happened since the plan was approved in September. So Kaylee, I will turn it over to you.
Perfect. So as Diane mentioned, the engagement with the utilities really started when we were working on the plan development. So a questionnaire was developed, and that was really to gather information from Indiana's utility groups regarding the funding and incentives that were available, site installation and connection, equity and environmental justice, energy generation, and strategic and long-term planning. We also held 3 in-person meetings in northern, central, and southern Indiana, and those were ideally to share information about the plan and gather feedback from attendees. If you weren't able to attend those meetings and are interested in what happened at those, the presentation slides and meeting notes are available on INDOT's website. And then in July, we held a virtual public walkthrough of the entire plan, as well as some in-person and virtual one-on-one meetings, and others attended some of our virtual and in-person meetings as well. So on the right, you can see some of the engagement that we had during the plan development with the utility groups. And during that engagement, we did receive some feedback, which was included in the implementation plan. So overall, we heard that there was a willingness to engage in EV charging projects, whether that's owning and operating, providing funding, or as with the VW utility group grant project, participating in a way that we can cross-collaborate on some of these projects already happening. There's a desire for early and frequent engagement on these projects, with a desired advance notice of 24 months, if possible. And then information about new lines and equipment. If the cost exceeds revenue, customers may need to pay the difference before construction, so understanding what that looks like. Estimations of investment could look between $50,000 and $125,000 in order to serve a 600 kilowatt station, and costs may be prohibitive at certain locations. We've heard from most utilities that they're considering load balancing to encourage charging during off-peak times. This could be metering infrastructure or off-peak pricing that are currently being offered. And there's resiliency efforts that are taking place, which could be grid modernization to support load growth and reliability, battery storage, or pilot projects like the school bus, vehicle to grid, and off-peak pricing. Slide. All right, so in order for effective implementation of the program, that's going to need significant coordination and collaboration among a diverse group of public and private stakeholders. And this is really needed now and throughout the implementation process. So we're continuing that engagement that we started during the plan development phase to ensure equitable engagement with different communities and different stakeholders. So right here on this slide, you'll see that our approach really centers around 3 pillars. And that includes marketing and branding, community engagement, and then vendor outreach in the registry. So as many of you know, we are working with many utilities on the coordination of the VW DC fast charging sites. We've held monthly coordination calls since November of last year. And during those meetings, we really discussed the project status, best practices, and lessons learned. We've also discussed the site host agreement process and its timing, and of course, the alignment with the NEVI candidate locations. So with this map here, you can see that there's overlap. That's for those 44 stations that are filling that 50-mile requirement under the NEVI program. And so Katie Olson from HNTB has been doing some one-on-one engagement over the last month with some of the utility groups as well. And since April, we've connected with about 20 of the utilities, 18 of which are listed on this slide that we have had communication with. And HNTB is continuing to do this outreach to ensure that we speak with you all and we make sure that everything is moving forward as it needs to be. All right, so through that outreach, a few things that we heard from our utility stakeholders are that the providers are interested and eager to speak about the opportunity to be part of the EV initiative. The 600 kilowatt level 3 charging locations is largely offered in the vicinity of exits identified for charging stations. There are substations that are within 1.5 miles of most of the locations identified, and they're interested in development and ownership. As Diane mentioned, there's that 2-year lead time on transformers and other supply chain issues that are coming up to meet the Build America, Buy America Act standards. And then some of the utilities are pending some of their decisions on involvement until they can provide more detailed information to municipalities, boards of directors, CEOs, and others that are involved in that decision-making process. So we continue to engage so that we can be explicit in what we communicate to potential bidders in terms of expectations and timeframe. We know that applicants really need to understand the power availability, the timing for installation, and installation costs to prepare their applications. We've discussed the possible large workload to just respond to requests, collaboration to streamline this process, and consideration of multiple requests for a site and only one selection per site. So here are some options you as a utility provider could do to participate in the NEVI program. At the low level, this could look like providing information about a site's available power, the necessary service upgrades, and estimated installation costs. At the mid-level, participation could be serving as a project partner and coordinating with teams submitting to the RFP for site assessments and EVSE placement. And at the high level, that could be the utility provider actually submitting a response to the RFP, serving as the owner and operator of a site or sites, and providing that match funding. So now that we've wrapped up kind of that presentation portion, we really want to allow some time for questions and discussion. So feel free to post any questions that you have in the chat. And we'll address them and unmute you, or you can unmute yourself, and so we can continue that conversation. So let me check first to see if we have any questions in the chat before we start with our discussion topics. Okay. All right, so INDOT's goals are really to ensure that there's a streamlined process for bidders to engage with the utilities. And that's preferably a single point of contact and a defined response time to ensure that everyone knows what to expect and is able to participate well. So first, we'd like to learn a little bit more about what it would take to have a utility as an owner, a developer, or a provider, and whether there's different levels of involvement that you are interested in, and if those could be defined. So feel free to raise your hand if you're interested in, discussing any of those items at all. All right. Dan, I don't know if you have anything you want to hop in on some of the conversations that have already taken place, or maybe, ways that, yes, the slides will be available.
Yes, the slides will be available. And I'm actually wondering too, understand there may be some hesitance to speak up on some of the topics. I think, Kaylee, we also could throw together like a really quick Survey Monkey just so we sort of get that poll. I'm sort of wishing I didn't know too much about Teams poll capabilities, but I actually have just seen it in a couple of meetings I attended just yesterday. So we also could do something like that. So because I think what we're really interested in understanding is the landscape. We know there are several different utilities represented on the call. So our desire is really to get that understanding of, we know some of you, it probably is a range, right, in terms of who is interested in that high, medium, low level of involvement that Kaylee mentioned. So that would probably be something we could do through a survey, a really quick short survey. And then I think the other thing we're trying to gather is information for the RFP. So Katie, when she did that one-on-one outreach in April, a lot of that was to really identify that single point of contact. So I think we're getting close on that, but also the anticipated response time. We've seen some other states like They have a table of all the utility providers. They provide that contact information in the RFP and also that anticipated response time, which is kind of funny because some say like 48 hours and some say 4 to 6 weeks to anticipate a response from the utility. But I do think that's helpful for bidders to know if they can expect that call back, within a week, or there's a big difference between 2 days and 4 to 6 weeks. So, whatever that is, we are interested in being transparent with potential bidders. So that's definitely another key question. And then some states have used this form, this idea of a utility information form. So we're toying with that idea also. We have some examples from other states, but again, we wanted to certainly get those examples in front of this group, the utility group, to see if that information is even something you would share with potential bidders. If there's a way we as the program management team could collect it in advance, that may mitigate the number of phone calls you're getting from potential bidders too. Because we know some people may not want to entertain phone calls from 5 to 10 different respondents. So these are the types of things we're just interested in hearing your opinion on. But I know it's difficult to be the first person to say something. Nobody wants to be first.
Diane, I'll just throw in there a pitch. Also, I think one of the things, it's not included here in our topics for discussion, but what are considerations that you all have as a utility industry, considerations, opportunities, challenges that we didn't talk about today that you think should be on our radar? I think anything that, in addition to what's listed here, that you think it's important for us to be aware of, insights that you have that can help us better refine the RFP and overall delivery of the program, certainly want to be aware of those.
I think I saw somebody about to say something, but maybe I was imagining that.
No, this is Chris Galloway with Decatur County REMC. I guess one of my, I don't want to call it a concern, but it's more of a, is there a time frame where new sites can be added to the plan, or is that ship sailing?
Well, that was part of the reason. I'll answer first, Scott, and then I'll kind of let you weigh in. That was part of the reason for increasing the number of sites. We had 72 in the plan. It's up to 80 now. In the interactive maps, we don't have that ability. We didn't want people to drop new pins and suggest new sites, but I think through the general comment form, if we're just maybe have the interchange wrong, like if we're one interchange away from an optimal interchange, I certainly think that information is something to type into the general comment form so we can, clarify that. Part 2 of that question, I think, goes back to Scott's mention of additional alternative fuel corridors being nominated. And Scott, I don't know, we haven't really talked about the best way to gather that information about potential sites on new AFCs.
Yeah, but I think, Chris, to your point, I think where there's information that we'd like to capture is within those alternative fuel corridors. And again, it's tough for us to forecast for those future corridors, but for existing corridors, I think, we're interested in kind of having that situational awareness of what's happening on the ground that might make an interchange more attractive or more conducive versus another. We tried to, over the course of our planning effort last year, pull together as much information as we could from public engagement, utility readiness, and sort of looking at traffic data and potential for utilization and revenue. But there are a whole host of other factors that could play into what makes a site work really well or potentially not work really well. So if there's an economic development project at one interchange that would really be conducive to having this DC fast charge infrastructure there as a complement, and it's 3 miles away, let's say, from an interchange that we've identified in our plan, there may be an opportunity to move that and still meet our federal requirements to build out the AFC corridors, but be able to provide some value add for other things that are happening from a land use and economic development standpoint. So I think that's where Diane mentioned the interactive maps having the ability to provide us feedback on each of those sites directly. I think that's where that's really helpful.
Thank you. And then there was another question I had that had to deal with last fall. I think it was somebody, it kept being brought up if a requirement possibly for bathrooms or whatnot. Is that still in there or no?
So there is still a federal requirement around certain, I guess what I'd say, customer experience amenities. So having access to restrooms. I think what we're finding though is that there is sort of a broad interpretation of how the access and availability of those amenities is sort of being contemplated at the federal level. Just for example, I know that that the USDOT and USDOE, who are administering this program jointly, they have indicated there have been potential sites brought to them for consideration that didn't have restrooms on site, but they were within quote unquote walking distance. And they have sort of given approval for those sites to be included in a plan. So I think to the extent that we can provide as the administrator of the program, as we can provide a network of locations that at least have reasonable access to, some of those basics, lighting, restrooms. And again, there's a question there of, do restrooms need to be accessible 24 hours a day? Is it just during business hours? I think those are things that we want to document good faith efforts to be responsive to those, but there doesn't seem to be hard and fast rules around how those are being sort of quantified.
Any other questions before? I'm happy to walk through some of the examples that we have. I have a Florida example and an Ohio example to kind of show two different options. And these were items that were included as an appendix to their RFPs. So I'll kind of start with Florida. So Florida had sort of this form, a one-page form that had, the purpose was really to just make sure there was efficient data exchange between the applicants and the utilities, and that the same information was received for every application package. So that standardized form certainly makes it easier, not only for the bidders, but also for INDOT as the evaluator, especially when you think about getting proposals for potentially 80 different sites. So this form focuses only on what is important for NEVI, not everything that would be required for a new service request form for a utility. So it's a scaled back version of that. So what is most important, as Kaylee mentioned earlier, is power availability, the timing for installation, and the cost. And then this is not, as I mentioned, a complete replacement for a new service request form. So we kind of start with that high level basic contact information understanding. And this is something we think that we're trying to provide. We're trying to include a matrix for our 80 sites, those utility providers, and some contact information. So that's kind of part one. Part two, this is more specific to the utility and the power availability at the location. It also sort of ties in that schedule component in terms of when the site will be built out and ready to be turned on, and then identifying how much power they need. So obviously we're trying to get to that 600 kilowatts for the NEVI compliance. Everything that's in italics, by the way, is just sample information that would be replaced by the information specifically for each bidder that was filling in this form. So that's just an example of how Florida did it. And then they also have this section of the form for additional information. This kind of goes, I think Florida is prioritizing and scoring You probably saw it even on the evaluation criteria that Scott mentioned. So sort of getting some extra points for resiliency efforts. And so that idea of, is there load metering? Is there solar panels or battery storage? Giving these bidders and their utility partners some extra credit for doing some of those resiliency types of solutions. The site plan, we have this separate, so Florida shows it as part of the form. We are requiring each site proposal to include that site schematic, which includes obviously the location of their utility connection. So we are breaking that out as a separate one-page part of the proposal. And Ohio, this is the example from Ohio. They didn't have the form. They basically had this table as an appendix to their RFP. And then all of these 4 columns, the type and quantity, unit cost and total cost. These again are just notional numbers, example numbers, not actual values, but they were asking for high level estimates. These were not numbers that the bidders were going to be held to, but basically just getting that understanding of what would be required from a utility make ready type of element of the project. So we have kind of both ways, I would say. Scott and I haven't had in-depth conversations, but certainly we didn't want to put anything out there publicly that you guys weren't comfortable with. So that was the goal in showing some examples today. And Florida went about their utility provider engagement much like we are, where they did a webinar and they sort of had some follow-up one-on-one meetings as necessary, but that was kind of the path. These are just a couple of different options. So don't know if either one or the other resonates more or less.
Hi, Diane. This is Corey Gordon with Duke Energy. Do you mind going back to the cost information on the Florida, or was there one? Maybe I missed
There was
that.
not. No. Yeah, they did not. Florida's focused more on, I feel like you could back into it on the service level portion of their form.
Yeah, potentially. I guess just to weigh in, right? Duke Energy has footprint in both Ohio and Florida. And I can tell you that in Ohio, and we weren't the only Ohio utility to have this challenge, we were not able to provide the detailed information that was on their form.
Okay.
And, that's really just not the procedure, right? That generally utilities follow, is to have that sort of itemized number. The other thing that I'd throw out is getting detailed, or I should say precise, cost information in the time frame of an RFP can be difficult. And Chris Kedwell from our customer delivery organization is on. If he wants to correct anything I'm about to say, I hope that he will, because I'm just the EV guy. I'm not the distribution grid guy. But I guess all of that said, I would advocate more for a Florida model, and this site, has maybe even sort of like a stoplight indicator, right? Green, amber, red. And I think by and large, you would find that level of screening means that, if you get a green, right, you're probably not going to have relatively high costs to bring power to it. That would be sort of how I'd think about that. And then once sites are specifically selected or interchanges are awarded or something like that, then with that lesser number of sites, you could go about the really, heavy precision of, okay, what are the costs at, this interchange on I-65 or whatever it is. That's my 2 cents, at least,
Right.
based on what I've seen.
That was helpful. Thanks. That was a great comment. I like the green, yellow, red approach. Could I ask a follow-up question on that topic? Just because I did think it would be, I did think there would be sort of these gateways of bidders getting information from utilities. So there'd be the first gateway is the proposal. And I think the green, yellow, red is great. And then there's the selection. So then there'll be another round of coordination with the utility. So what, at that point, at that contingent award process, is that something with where you could get that detailed information and schedule component figured out?
So, let me make sure I'm tracking with the contingent award. So at the point of contingent award, you, HNTB and NDOT would have, a collection of 44, preferred sites with an address that you plan to deploy to. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct. And they'd have some portion of their budget to do pre-construction and site coordination. Forget what the term we use in the RFP, but yeah, there's some pre-construction activities that they would get reimbursed for.
Right. So what I think could happen then, and again, Chris, shut me up as needed, but we could move into an actual, application for service at that point in time. And, go through sort of that normal process. And inherently, I believe that would lead to detailed setting of schedule, to, exact cost and aid of construction, if any, and that sort of thing.
That's great.
This is Chris Galloway again. I got another question. How does this affect, or maybe I'm not as familiar with the rules in Indiana, sales for resale kind of situations? Because if these things are owned and operated by a third party and not the utility, I mean, is there a issue with that as far as the amount of rates or whatever that they're able to charge for this or for the electricity versus what we would supply it at?
Scott, do you want to tackle that question? Or maybe Katie? I have heard that question before, and I should have prepped the answer to that one before the call, because I know that we've discussed that. And Kaylee, if you have logged anything, everybody feel free to weigh in, because I know we have tackled this question before.
Hey, Diane, this is Kevin Kirkham at NIPSCO. I might be able to chime in there
Thanks,
for
Kevin.
you as well. So House Bill 1221 in Indiana,
That's right.
legislature did go ahead and enact that. And part of that allows for sales for resale for electric vehicle charging equipment. So no longer, if you sell on a KWH basis, are you required to become a regulated utility? They kind of waive that for EVSE owners.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. I knew I was blanking on the House bill number. I should have it I should have my cheat sheet of House Bill 1221 and what it contains.
Yeah, I'll just throw in on the federal regulation side. The NEVI program requirements call out that an owner operator is able to realize a reasonable rate of return. They don't really define what that is, so there may be a little bit more guidance yet to come on that, but there is at least, I think, some peace of mind for proposers that there is a recognition on the by the folks that are administering the program at the federal level for the cost revenue, revenue generation, cost recovery for the owner operators.
Thank you.
Well, it looks like we are, have exhausted our questions.
I
And
think so. I will put the slides together, and Kaylee, I'll get with you right after this call about the poll. I'm going to call it a poll, not a survey. I think survey is like a scary word, but I think we can have a poll put together pretty easily. Something 5 questions or less. if you all wouldn't mind responding to that, that would be really helpful. But yeah, we really appreciate everyone's time today, and we hope the slides come in handy. And with some of the tools being online also, we encourage everybody to check out the maps and put comments in. And we'll look forward to engaging with you. I know we'll see some of you next week at the open house event. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks
Thank
for
you
your
all very
time.
much. We'll have
Thank you.
slides and the recording of the webinar today. We'll have that available on the INDOT NEVI webpage.
Thank you.